YouTube channel. This is all new to me.
And you'll tell me, Cheryl, when she can start talking.
Okay.
Over the cue. Ready? Go ahead.
Hello, I'm Heather Hiscox, not in the studio in Toronto, in Ottawa today. Outside of our morning live hours on CBC News Network, we have something special for you for the next 15 minutes, a Facebook Live with His Excellency, the Governor General David Johnston. Hello.
Hi, Heather, and we're under the great red oak tree.
Yes, we should say where we're situated. This is this is the oldest tree on your grounds?
Planted in 1906 by the Duke of Connaught, who was one of Queen Victoria's sons, a daughter of Princess Louise, and he then became Governor General here in 1911.
Well, isn't that, it's a magnificent backdrop in your private gardens. Can you just show us around, tell us
well,
what
right
people
over here
are
at
seeing?
the lower and upper terrace, but this, we have a lot of public gatherings here as well, and then just beyond that fence are the rest of the 80 acres that are open 365 days a year during the daytime, and last year we had about 350,000 people through.
Beautiful. That was a record number. You've made that a very important
we'll have more.
part.
We'll have more. This is the home of the people of Canada.
Yes.
So they should feel very much at home here.
Which is one of your main, one of the messages we have heard from you over these 7 years. It struck me that as I was coming to see you that this will be perhaps the last day I refer to you as Your Excellency. You will still be the Right Honourable. You won't be Your Excellency anymore. Because
well, I suspect you'll call me Grandpa Book then.
Oh, well, I like
my grandchildren call me, and you're about that age gap, aren't you?
Oh, no, I don't know about that. But how are you feeling? It's 2 weeks today. Yeah. Julie Payette will be sworn in to succeed you. How are you feeling about these dwindling days?
I'm delighted about the appointment of Julie. I've known her for a long time. She came to McGill with our most prestigious entering scholarship, and she's just been wonderful all the way through. And I say to Julie about advice, I said, well, you want to be both operationally competent and have a good strategic view. Operational competent because there's so many moving parts here. But strategic, looking at things from 30,000 square feet, and then I realized Julie's used to looking at things from 30,000 miles, not 30,000 feet, but 30,000 miles.
She has a global perspective for sure, doesn't she?
It's been a joy. It's been, the 7 years have gone by very quickly, and it's, for my wife and myself, it's just been a gift to do this job and a joy to do it.
Well, that is what you said as you entered into it. You accepted the position with joy, and it has been, you have seen the joy on your faces as you've entered into all of the moments.
It's a misuse of the title of C.S. Lewis's book called Surprised by Joy, which, with respect to his faith, but we've been, I think, surprised by the joy, and the joy of seeing this country with so many good people doing things to make it better.
Our first question from Saeed, who wants to know, and by all means, just to you know the drill about Facebook Lives, but put the questions into the CBC News Facebook page or our YouTube channel, and they'll get to me and to His Excellency. But as you look back, what are you proudest of in terms of what you brought to the office, what you did for Canadians?
Well, I think that may be too much the focus on the first person singular, Heather. It's a first person plural that you function with. We have a great team here, and a team of the other lieutenant governors and the commissioners, and I think our job has been to strengthen this institution of one side of the crown that recognizes the constitutional law aspects and the non-business of government, which is important. And I've just seen a group of people here at Rideau Hall that they're passionate about what they do, work very hard at what they do, and for me that's been very pleasant.
Well, you're so modest in that, but in terms of, because you wanted to be a bridge to bring people together, the smart and caring country, in terms of, is there a legacy which you feel that you have established in doing so?
I think making the institution better known to Canadians have been important. The theme of my installation address was a smart and caring nation, a call to service. That notion of public service as a duty of all of us as citizens. Thirdly, the aspects of smart and caring that come in different buckets and different sizes and shapes. I think we've moved the needle somewhat on being more caring, ensuring that equality of opportunity works for more of our students, preferably all of our students, and the smartness of just ensuring that we are as wise and as thoughtful as we go about managing the affairs of our communities in this country as we can be.
Harrison Paul, thank you for your question. He would like to know, what's the one thing that you've enjoyed most?
Probably meeting people in the communities across the country we have an award, one of our 70 different honors, which is called the Sovereign's Medal on Volunteerism. Began when Romeo LeBlanc was Governor General 30 years or so ago, 25, and an Acadian, a lovely man, very down to earth, and he started the Caring Canadian Award to recognize the unsung heroes in their communities. And went along 25 or 30 a year, and then it fell afoul of budget cuts. So we wanted to restore it, and we've established a foundation to help us with external collaboration networks and raising the funds. So we raised $5 million to ensure that that Caring Canadian Award would go forward. It's now the Sovereign's Medal on Volunteerism. We awarded 1,000 of those last year, and we'll award many more. And people say, well, don't you get too many? I say, well, there are 40,000 communities in this country, and in every one there's at least one person, many more, that should be recognized as being the unsung heroes. So that's been a great joy for us.
I bet it has. Now, Gary would like to know, sort of at the opposite end of the spectrum, what was the most difficult decision or experience you have had?
Well, the one that I would isolate is when we lose a member of our armed forces abroad, when they're killed, their body is repatriated to Trenton. And my wife and I, first of all, I'm informed immediately of this happening. And then secondly, my wife and I go to Trenton to be with the family to receive the repatriated member of our armed forces. And you go trying to steel yourself to be as helpful as you can in this extraordinarily painful circumstance. And every time I've drawn strength from the families who are in great grief, of course, but are conscious of their son or daughter having served their country well. Initially, 15, 20 years ago, those were very private ceremonies, only for the immediate family and the unit, the regiment that the person was part of. But, and the U.S. practice was the same, but here in Canada, with the beginning of the Afghan war, we made the decision that those should be public recognition as well, because every time we lose a member of our armed forces, that's a matter of grief for the whole nation. So it then became appropriate for the Chief of Defense Staff, the Minister of Defense, the Governor General's wife to attend, to be with the family, and then the hearse proceeds from Trenton to Toronto.
On the Highway of Heroes.
It's the Highway of Heroes, and people gather on the overpasses in the hundreds to pay their respects to this fallen soldier going by.
It's amazing.
And it brings it into our homes, into our hearts. When we lose a person who is signed up to protect Canada, it's a matter of grief for us all. Enno
Kirchhoff, sorry Enno if I'm missing that also wanted to know further about in the capacity as Commander-in-Chief, because when you were appointed as Governor General, you indicated you may feel uncomfortable wearing the uniform of Commander-in-Chief because of your previous position, academic without a military experience. And then the question was, how has your experience working with and speaking with members of the armed forces changed this feeling? Well, enormous pride, and that change in my mind occurred because the one thing I asked the Prime Minister to go to Afghanistan as soon as I could, and I think within 30 days, Walton Tinchuk, the Chief of the Defense Staff, and I were en route to Afghanistan. We hit the ground. I was in a combat uniform, as you have to be appropriately downplayed. And when we finished, he said, you know, the men and women of the armed forces would be very proud if you would wear that uniform regularly. I said, I will, and I did. On that same visit, I spent the last half hour with the senior liaison from the U.S. military. He said, I have two things that I want to tell you very directly. One is the quality of professionalism of the Canadian Armed Forces is second to none in the world. Americans will go anywhere in the same foxhole with Canadians. Number two, he said, something I never expected to see in a military theater. It's the capacity of Canadian men and women in our uniform to take off the warrior hat and to put on the civil reconstruction hat, working with a group of farmers to restore their collective, rebuilding a school, getting the teachers there and protecting them, functioning with non-governmental organizations from all over the world. He says there's a remarkable capacity of you Canadians to build order out of chaos and to restore civilized living as best you can. He said, for the longest time I thought it was in your training, and I looked at your training manuals and I grilled your senior brass, and I came to the conclusion it's not. It's the fundamental values that are of Canada that are reflected in the people who sign up for the armed forces. One of the reasons I'm so proud of our men and women who wear the Canadian uniform. Getting a number of questions about the monarchy, as you would expect. Ian Tetchower would like to know, what was your relationship like with the Queen? A wonderful relationship from my point of view, and I think you said she treated you like family at one point. I think you've said over the years. That's a fair comment, Heather. When we first met
went to meet the Queen and Prince Philip, we were very lucky because they were at Balmoral, their estate in Scotland, and it's 80,000 acres. They secure the perimeter, but inside it's kind of like a big home. And they could not have been warmer, kinder, more thoughtful to us. And
so you were sitting down at the table doing dishes? Were you doing dishes with the Queen?
Indeed. I suppose I should be careful about these stories, but I think the first night there, we were going to have a barbecue at an old shepherd's hut about 25 kilometers from the main residence. And we got there, first of all, he drove a Land Rover with my wife in it, and she drove a Land Rover with me in it. And when we were coming back at the dark of night in these little Highland highways, I had visions of us tumbling over the side, never being found. But we got to the hut, and he was barbecuing venison that he'd shot on the property a week before. I came over to help a little bit, and it was pretty clear I could hand him the coals, but the venison was his. So I go in the kitchen, seeing if I can be useful. The Queen is setting the table. And so I start setting the table, and she says, over there, says, you do this very well, you know. Well trained by my mother, Your Majesty.
Oh, my goodness. So there are questions about the future and the next generation royals who are so popular now, and what your question, for example, from George Eisner, wondering, sorry, this is from Ed Want, wondering your thoughts on the future. And we've had other questions from viewers and from people writing in terms of how you think the relationship will change, the nature of the relationship between Canada and Great Britain with the next generation.
Well, I usually answer that, Heather, by saying, you know, we're the product of 1,000 years of constitutional history with a form of government we call parliamentary democracy, which is pretty vigorous, with a constitutional monarchy. And for me, the constitutional monarchy transmits stability, a long-term focus on fundamental values, the protection of the Constitution, and the rule of law, which are very important to us. And when people say, well, but we should change, get rid of some things, I said, well, be careful, be conscious of what it is that you want to change to, and whether it's better or not. And then I say, if you wanted to choose 10 countries around the world where the people of that particular country and others outside would say, it's a pretty satisfactory level of government, maybe not perfect, but it seems to function well with a basic sense of justice. In that list of 10, you'd have Denmark, Norway, Sweden, United Kingdom, Netherlands, Australia, New Zealand, Canada. What's common to all of those is they're constitutional monarchies with parliamentary democracies. And so government is split into a head of government and head of state. The head of state function is different than the business of government, and it has to do with some of those values I've just mentioned.
We're about halfway through our discussion, maybe a little bit more. Just to let you know, as you watch at home, Facebook Live, thank you on the CBC News Facebook page. You can still send some questions, although we're getting deluged. Oh, maybe about 5 minutes left. Okay.
Shorter answers from me.
No, I need to jump in. What is the first thing, this is from Richard Lacoste, what is the first thing you will do when you're not the GG? First thing.
In fact, we'll be going on an international trip to South America.
No rest? Or is that a holiday?
No, it's on to the next.
Oh. Not even quiet family time?
We work at that. We have our farm that is 45 kilometers west of here.
Yes.
And the 5 daughters and the 14 grandchildren. Then Sharon has a safari planned for us, as a matter of fact, within the first month. So
that's wonderful.
Wants me to get off and see some wildlife and some birds and so on. That'd be a good thing.
Kevin Tolan would like to know, when you're in all of those meetings with heads of state and heads of government, now what Kevin may not know is you have this distinguished academic background and a wide, very wide knowledge base, but what do you discuss with all of those men and women?
Number one, I'm a great believer in personal diplomacy, that these meetings do make a difference, and we should do as much as we can in this middle power Canada. Number two, I'm a believer in diplomacy of knowledge, that if we can share knowledge freely, it enhances relationships and reduces conflict. So we've done, I think, 56 different country missions in the 7 years. Heather, I was in Washington last week, for example, for a military-related meeting. That's the 7th trip I've paid to the United States. And it depends on the circumstances. Very often, my itinerary would be education, investment, trade, and people-to-people relationships. Okay. But it could vary. In Washington, it was the Joint Chief of Staff, so our focus was largely military and international politics, etc. But in the meantime, trying to use that as an occasion where these two institutions in our two countries come together and do things with a common purpose, and it strengthens the relationship between the two.
I hope they'll realize, I mean, you're not just making happy chat, obviously. You are fully briefed on all of these issues, and they're at the behest of the government.
One of the 5 functions of this office is the external relations function. So, as I say, we've traveled a lot. And
more than any other.
How
many? There were 31 countries in 2015. So
we see. I think there's 56 different country missions, and we usually go with a delegation of 15 or 20 people, parliamentarians and people who represent different associations or interests. And I say the first purpose of these visits is strengthening the work of our people on the ground, both the professional diplomats, but the other cultural, business, educational interests, and the delegation usually helps that. But we also receive all of the diplomats coming to Ottawa to present their letters of credence, which they must present before they can function. And we try very hard to have that happen within a few days and no more than a few weeks of their arrival here. So we have at least one ceremony a month here at Rideau Hall. And I feel I should pay a tuition fee because I get briefed on the particular country in advance, and it really is wonderful to learn about it so you can have an intelligent conversation with the incoming ambassador.
There you go.
That's about 70 a year, because we have about 200 and the changeovers once every 3.5 years.
You're still at university. Okay, I have to come to the last question. I think we could go on, but I know your time is at a premium, particularly with just 2 weeks ago. So a question from Romalda Park, wanting to know, you mentioned your grandchildren. I want to know what was the most special thing that you were able to do for your grandchildren because of your job. She's a grandma and would like to do all kinds of things with her grandchildren. So a personal question on which to conclude.
Read books to them.
Read books?
Sure.
Best advice?
And take joy. I mean, the beauty of a grandparent is that you have all of the rights and none of the responsibilities of a parent. So we have the grandchildren here a lot. And when we're installed, the custom is that you come in a horse and carriage, a calèche.
Yes. And
our wonderful people here, we had 7 grandchildren at the time, made arrangements for 6 of them to come out to the calèche and get in with me. And then there wasn't room, I guess, on the golf cart taking them out. So our 7th grandchild, who was the eldest 7 years old, was coming from here, going a kilometer to the gate to jump on the calèche. And as she was going, the RCMP officer taking her, she said, "May I ask you a question, sir?" He said, "Sure." She says, "How big is this?" And she says, "It's 80 acres. And he says, "Does my grandpa book own this?" He says, "Not exactly, dear." She says, "What's the deal?" He says, "Well, he sort of rents it for 5 years or so." She says, "80 acres? Yeah." He says, "My grandpa book owns a farm. It's 100 acres. It's a lot bigger than that."
That's wonderful. It's been wonderful to see the joy that you've taken in your grandchildren. And you know, one of the other things that we're hearing from so many Canadians was a wonderful role model in terms of integrity, empathy, sense of humor, excellent president of University of Waterloo, and excellent GG. A person of and for the people. My goodness, there are so many compliments for you.
Well, Sharon will be very surprised about the sense of humor part, Heather.
Oh. Well, I am not. On behalf of everybody watching, thank you so much for the time and for all of the conversations over these many years. Come on, as a former Montreal Uni, we certainly have had some fun, and this isn't part of it.
Thanks, Heather.
All the best.
Thanks, Heather.
Thank you.
Too short.